Welcome to Daikaiju Network Podcast, where we have a healthy obsession with Kaiju. I am your co-host, Kenton. With me is your other co-host,
Jason. How's it going?
So we are doing the discussion of Agon, the Atomic Dragon this week. And if you had joined us a couple weeks ago for the commentary, well, here we are, where we're talking about it again. But you know what? If you didn't join us for the commentary, all this is going to be new to you. And for people who did join us last week, there will be a few things we'll kind of repeat a little bit in terms of some bits of information about the, not really movie per se, but the miniseries. And go from there. And I'm assuming, too, like, spoiler alert for anybody who was with us on that commentary, I'm willing to bet that our final overall opinions probably on the film. It's a mini series, it's not a film, but I'm going to call it a film, even though that's technically incorrect.
Since all 4 episodes are put together, sort of as a film.
I would assume our final thoughts, by and large, really are not that different from what they were a couple weeks ago. So, spoiler alert.
And then the other thing too, if you were on the previous episode and already know or haven't know, this is going to be our last episode for the next couple months, as I'm going to be busy in the midst of moving at the moment. You can probably see with the Home Depot box behind me. So this will be the final episode for the next couple months, and we will be back on December 18th.
Well, yeah, basically, 2 months exactly. So
almost 2 months, yeah.
For the most part. But yeah, so it's going to be weird when we come back here.
Yeah, I'm going to be
like Christmas.
That and a little bit of a different setup and location for my side, anyways.
Yeah.
So this will be the final time all of you out there are going to be seeing what you see behind me. So
before we begin, Jason, give us a tour of your apartment.
There's really not much. all of this is basically the dining room and living room is basically takes up half of the apartment, and then you got the kitchen to my left, and then behind me is the bathroom, and then over here is the bedroom behind that wall. So that's about it.
Garage.
You can sort of say that maybe a 2 to 3 garage worth.
But anyway, let's just start with Agon the Atomic.
Before I do that, before we get on, just kind of a little bit of a housekeeping. For those that watch us live on streams, although not entirely sure, kind of in limbo with YouTube, just hasn't been really working for the past month or so. Not entirely sure why. Just probably figure something out with that. But besides YouTube, we're on Twitch, DLive, Facebook, and Twitter. And as far as our audio versions of the podcast, you can find us at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn as well. And you can also watch us live on our own website at DaikaijuNetwork.com.
Okay. Are we actually Ready
Go.
to proceed? Okay.
We're all
So here
good.
we are with Agon the Atomic Dragon. I just want to do some quick, brief behind the scenes information on it so we kind of get it out of the way. And for those of you who either just aren't fans of commentaries or just didn't join us last time, Agon the Atomic Dragon was produced by. Um, Oh shit! I forgot. Can you
uh,
look that up, please, while I discuss something else that I do know?
yeah, it was the original network that aired Agon the Atomic Dragon, or it's also known as Giant Phantom Monster Agon. Uh, Japanese title Moboroshi no Daikaiju Agon. But it was originally aired on Fuji TV from January
Oh, I don't.
2nd through January 8th of 1968.
Well, and yes. However,
It
it
was
was
produced by
produced in
Nippon
19
TV.
yes, it was produced in 1964. Toho smelled a rat. And so then they did some investigating and they prevented this thing from being shown for a while. And what ended up happening was that Shiniki Sekizawa, who was a screenplay writer for Toho, for much of the earlier Showa era films, he was kind of involved with this project a little bit. I don't think he necessarily wrote. He may have been a consultant. It's not really clear as to what his role was with this project, but he was somehow involved. And then there was a special effects technician from Subaraya's special effects company involved with this as well. Again, it's unclear to what extent he was involved with this project as well. And as a result of that, Toho was kind of like, okay, this is fine. This is kosher. We'll let it go. So it did not get shown for 4 years because
Mm-hmm.
Toho is not your friend. I'm sorry to say it, folks. Yeah, I'm glad Toho exists. We got a lot of fine, monster and special effects films. But when it comes to public relations and fan relations,
It's
they
not
really
that
don't
great.
like you. They don't like you. I am sorry. They do not like you.
It's not surprising, but and also a bit sad too when
Well,
you
it
think
is.
about it.
And look, this is true. I have seen and even met people who had YouTube channels where either they were threatened to be sued by Toho if they didn't take down certain Godzilla video tributes where they cut together various clips from the movies with music and stuff. I've even come across people who uh, uh, even had their own channels taken down because of that. Like it's been inconsistent as far as the actions that were taken uh, by Toho against some of these people who were doing nothing more than just putting small clips together for like Godzilla tribute videos and stuff like that. And I don't want to go on this tangent here, but basically my point is going back to Agon, they're overly protective. I think it's fine if you're protective of your property, that's
I,
fine. But the way Toho does it
it's a bit of an
is
overreach.
awful. It's awful. It's an overreach. They don't like you, and I mean that. They don't like you. They want you. They look at you as a dumb consumer and nothing more. So that's the truth of it, folks. But getting back to Agon, yeah, because of Toho getting in there, temporarily canceling the debut of Agon the Atomic Dragon. It took 4 years for it to finally come out, and it was a four-part miniseries here. And of course, yeah, I mean, Agon definitely is another Godzilla clone. It was cashing in on the popularity of Godzilla at the time. By the time Agon was originally produced, um, Mothra versus Godzilla was in production,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, it may have even already been out in theaters potentially by the time this was going into production. Again, there's not a whole lot of information on this, at least in English, about this miniseries. But let's just kind of get into it. The gist of the story is very simple, kind of like a lot of miniseries you used to see here in America back in the 70s and 80s, and kind of in the 90s as well. Pretty straightforward plot, nothing wrong with that. But here, again, simple standard monster fare as far as there have been some weird happenings. A journalist teaming up with some scientists are investigating, realize there's this kaiju that has been alive, been awoken. Guess what? By atomic radiation. And then some shenanigans by the kaiju, Agon, take place, and then everybody's trying to figure out a way to stop it. In the end, Agon is driven into the sea, and it's just kind of up to the viewer to decide, did Aegon die or will he eventually die? So I think in the end, technically, Aegon is alive, and I think they're kind of hypothesizing, will he ever die?
Hmm.
And even reappear. So that's basically the gist of it.
Right.
Um, so, um, you know, I guess I don't know exactly where to start. Part of me wants to try to do something different, but I don't know what that different thing would be here for our discussion. Um, well, why don't you just start us somewhere?
Uh, I would like to start off with the cast for Aegon. Uh, as I take a look at the list of those that are in this movie starring Shinji Hirota, Asao Matsumoto, was it Nobuhiko Shimashima, Akimi Sawa, Shinya Ire, and yeah, and that's about it. And just from that short list of cast members, known cast members starring in this miniseries or feature film, uh, to me, I mean, obviously, I haven't really seen or heard of these people. It's just kind of they're just kind of a one hit wonder, as far as I know. I don't know if they've been in earlier or later TV shows or possible feature films uh, before and after the shooting of Agon. So, in the sort of sense, with uh, with the cast members, I think they did a decent job with what they had as far as a script and as far as the direction that they were given and how they acted.
Yeah. Again, when you're talking about a television miniseries, again, a lot of parallels to what you see here in the States for about a 3 or 4 decade period when mini TV series used to happen on a fairly regular basis. Um, that's all changed now, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's standard fare. Like here in America, a lot of times your miniseries involved either people who already were involved with television acting, either they were in their own series or maybe they had done other miniseries. Once in a great while, you could get someone that was from movies, but typically, if you've found people that were in movies, they're usually, um, like B movie types. I forget the actor's name. I want to say his first name is Mark, but he was in the first two Beastmaster movies, and he was the main character in the original V miniseries in the early 80s. So, yeah, he was a movie actor, but let's face it, the Beastmaster movies aren't your top of the line type of films. They would more or less, and I consider them B type movies. Yeah, the first Beastmaster is good. Second Beastmaster gets kind of quirky, but it's still enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but more or less B movies. And I think in Japan it's pretty similar. You're probably getting people from television or who were in films, but just were not superstars or anything like that. Um, and again, this is typical monster fare. This miniseries is not breaking any ground whatsoever. Like we said here just a short moment ago, this is piggybacking off of the Godzilla stuff at the time. I mean, by the time this started production, either Mothra versus Godzilla was just getting ready to be released or had already been released. So you're talking about this film piggybacking off of at least three Godzilla films that came before it. And, you know, there's just nothing special about it. Does that necessarily mean this film isn't enjoyable? No. Here's the thing, and I've said this, I think, a number of times on this podcast. I used to kind of not care for the Gamera films. In fact, there was even a point where I hated them because I looked at the Gamera films. I'm like, these are just stupid Godzilla knockoff films. Like, why would I want to watch these? These are garbage. And it took me a number of years and rewatching them when I became a more mature adult to really appreciate them. I'm going, okay, yes, Gamera, is Daiei's Godzilla, but there is some charm and there is some substance to these things. And the Showa Gamera films have been actually some of my favorite kaiju films since I've kind of had a resurgence in my own personal fandom going on almost a decade now. And um, you know, I look at Agon in a very similar fashion. Now, getting back to the acting part, it's fine. I mean, there are moments where I think, and this kind of involves dialogue and the writing to an extent, but some of the dialogue and stuff is kind of quirky and ridiculous and dumb at times. But the actors, they do okay. I mean, by and large, they do what they're supposed to do. You're not looking at, someone like an Akira Takarado who is a just all around a better talent and probably a more seasoned actor at this
Mm-hmm.
point, even compared to some of the other cast members. Um, they do what they're supposed to do for a cheap mini series that's piggybacking off of Godzilla films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and I just want to bring up again as far as the main actress and stuff. Like, it would have been nice if they could have,
Yeah.
uh, you know, had her perform a little bit better. Besides just mainly standing around and just kind of holding her hands in front of her, uh, body and
And
everything, and
part of the problem with her, yes, is the writing. Part of the problem there is the writers, but then another part of the problem is the person who casted her and the fact that she looks out of it. Like
that and the minimal direction that they gave her.
well, yeah, I mean, there are issues on both ends here. She shouldn't have been hired. I'm sorry, but then at the same time, though, too, would they have got if they had gotten a different actress? Would she have done better? I would say she definitely wouldn't look so creepy. That probably would have helped on a small bit, but she was very distracting at first when she first came into the film because she just kind of like you would see like in some alien films or something like that, at the time, just kind of, this weird, creepy vibe and look about her. But then they kind of slowly open her up. She kind of becomes the stereotypical emotional female gradually as the miniseries progresses. But again, she plays no part. I remember saying this when we did the commentary here 2 weeks ago that I'm like, there's no purpose for her other than to be the journalist's love interest, and even then, that is not explored in as much depth. Again, problems with the writing, but then again, though, too, what kind of writing are you expecting out of something that is a cheap miniseries that is designed to be nothing more than a cash grab? So you're kind of like, on the one hand, yes, you can be critical, but then on the other hand, you realize you can't be overly critical because you kind of have to believe, and I think even the people producing this realized and knew that, look, we're just trying to get eyeballs and advertisers on this because hey, Godzilla's pretty popular. This kaiju subgenre is doing pretty well. We want to get a slice of the pie on that. We're not going to create anything like the first Gojira where it has a deep human interest story involved. We're just going to do just enough to tell our story.
Mm-hmm. So, with that, let's talk a little bit about the story.
straightforward kaiju. Again, there's not much to say about it. I mean, if you've ever seen a giant monster movie, chances are your first movie, I'm willing to bet 80% of the time, a person's first introduction to a giant monster film is a giant monster on the loose kind of film. And that's what this is. I do enjoy some aspects of this miniseries that it didn't do it that much, but it did it a bit more than even some of the kaiju movies of the time did, where it slightly dove in to the atomic weapons, atomic power story aspect a tad bit more. It's not a night and day difference, but it's noticeable enough. Um, the most distracting part of the story, and this is one of the things that I think about almost immediately when I think of this miniseries, is the section of the film. I'm kind of using miniseries and film interchangeably, so just FYI. Um, is when these two robbers show up at this guy's house. This is kind of a little bit more towards the end of the film, and there's a little boy that kind of shows up periodically. This is that little boy's dad, and these two robbers get involved. They are involved. I think, was it like a robbery or a drugs scheme or something like that. They're in a storm in a rowboat.
Yeah, yeah, they were trying to smuggle was it cocaine in the suitcase.
That's pretty hardcore. You don't even see that in any of the other actual monster films.
Yeah.
But anyways, during a storm, their boat capsizes. They lose their white magical powder, and so then they just happen to come up to this house, which is the little boy and his family's house, and then they basically, long story short, take the boy hostage and tell his father, look, you're going to help us retrieve our stuff, otherwise we're going to kill your boy and maybe you as well. And Agon kind of sort of plays into this a little bit later, but the story turns into this whole hostage style situation. And then gradually it moves a little bit more back towards Agon, because then our original main characters, the journalist, his girlfriend, and then the main scientists start to get involved. Then not Akon, not the singer. Agon shows up and just so happens to end up killing these robbers. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
they were trying to get away in the helicopter.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
And for some reason, they were just dumb enough to go right towards Agon. And they had the suitcase, and it was kind of a one fell swoop to try to lure Agon to use or to dispose the suitcase of cocaine into him. And so they kind of fell in place with the robbers flying in the helicopter, but then Agon destroys the helicopter and then and everything. I think he also eats up whatever was in there, and then yeah.
Well, yeah, but they were taunting him though too. Like they were kind of being cocky. They're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna get away," ha ha ha. And I'm just like, "You idiots!" It's just one of those things where it's like, you deserve to die for that. Like,
yeah,
And but this whole sequence takes far too long, and that's the part of this movie that I think you could have that, but it needed to be tightened up.
And the other thing too, when it comes to that whole robber sequence of the story, is that when it gets to that part, and I think it was in episode 3 of the miniseries, that it just sort of, and we've talked about this during the commentary, just sort of felt like a completely different story, and it sort of kind of reminded me when it came to the Death Kappa movie that we talked and or commentated on many years ago, that the second half just felt almost completely different at that point, at a certain point. And that sort of reminded me when it came to the whole robber thing. But then once we kind of knew the father and then the other, this same crew and the boy in the first early two episodes that started to meld kind of back in together. So it was just sort of kind of a thorn on the side of the story. It just felt a bit off and it felt sort of completely different. And the other thing that they should have shortened too was that whole cave scene, which just took way too long, as you mentioned in the commentary episode a couple weeks ago. That, and I think with the film version, it's an hour and just a little over an hour and a half long. So if they would have shortened that up, it could have at least have been maybe an hour 20 minutes. But with how long this thing is, it probably, I don't know, probably shouldn't have been that long with how the story progressed and everything.
Yeah, well, and again, it's similar to some again, American miniseries on occasion. I've seen some American miniseries where, yeah, they will just, take their sweet time to just go through a friggin' story, and kind of what they're doing more or less is padding things out because I think they, um, by and large, are kind of like, okay, well, we agreed to this contract for X amount of nights for X amount of hours. This is kind of what we got to do here, and um, and so I think that kind of was the issue here. They realized, look, we have a bare bones story. There isn't much we can do. Having some drama, even though it doesn't necessarily uh, uh, connect with the story as well as it should, it's better than having a bunch of dull moments. I think that's kind of what happened here. And because I think technically, if you were to do a super edit of this movie where you did the best you could to streamline this more, instead of it being like an hour 33 minutes, it probably would come down to maybe hour 20 or something like that, maybe hour 15. Um, and so I think that was just part of the issue here. Does that mean I shouldn't criticize it? No, not necessarily. The thing is, though, too, you had mentioned Death Kappa earlier. The thing is with Death Kappa, that was a movie that ran at its own pace. It wasn't some sort of mini series where they agreed with a television station, okay, we will fill X amount of minutes over X amount of nights. Um, Death Kappa 2 was a quirky film intentionally as well.
Mm-hmm.
They did their own shtick there with that. Um, with this, though, yeah, like the whole second half of the film, you get, I think, maybe one or two decent city destruction scenes over the course of this miniseries, but I think they dropped the ball considerably. Kind of once the bank robber storyline begins, that's not only when the film or miniseries starts to slow down considerably. It's just when the whole thing itself just be doesn't become as entertaining because even when Agon does show up and even after these robbers are disposed of, Aegon does next to nothing. He stands around walking around with this rowboat in his mouth with the little boy inside for I don't know how long. And next to nothing happens. Yeah, everyone's standing around freaking out. We got to save the boy. They're trying to figure out ways to get the little boy down safely. They try a couple of things here and there. Nothing, is ever really done. They earlier in the film use some stock footage of some self-defense force training to kind of make it look like they were firing on Agon later, and then. But then they kind of drop, and again, I think part of that was maybe budgetary reasons,
Obviously.
where yeah, and that's unfortunate, but I think your conclusion is supposed to be not just the area of the film that brings everything together. It's supposed to be really your biggest and most exciting set piece. And the most exciting stuff within this miniseries is within the first two episodes or the first half of it. And then once you get into the latter half, Aegon is barely present, and then even when he does show up, next to nothing happens. And that's the most unfortunate aspect about this whole thing is that the latter half of it is rather dull. You get bored, and you begin to feel like this thing is longer than it actually is. And I've always said this. I've said it on this podcast, and I've even said it in real life, on social media, and to other people in person. I said the biggest crime any movie or TV series can commit is to not be entertaining. I don't care if you have the most, the most outlandish type of story that doesn't make sense, but if it's entertaining, you've got me hooked. And this second half is just pitifully dull. And that is the most tragic thing about this miniseries, where, yeah, there's nothing, as I said earlier, there's nothing special about this miniseries. There just isn't. There's nothing
Hmm.
groundbreaking happening here, but you still could have made just another really exciting giant monster on the loose, destroying cities and that sort of thing taking place. In the end, you created something that kind of touched upon some of that stuff, but in the end, it became this Z-Quill type of experience that frustrated the
I
hell
like
out of me.
I like how you just try to bring in Zequel just for that
They
part.
sponsor the podcast, actually. No, they
uh,
don't.
but yeah, I mean, with the story, with the first half of it, they had, you know, kind of a potential thing sort of
It
going
was
on
great, a
with it.
great build-up.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was pretty good. They had the potential of trying to go somewhere with this particular, not only the story but the monster as well. And I don't know if they had any implications of try to reuse Agon after this, or if it's just a one-off. Who knows?
I doubt it, yeah.
Um, but just with how it was going at first, they had something going on there. But then when it came to, like you said, with the whole robber scenario in the second half, it just sort of started to go downhill. There wasn't really nothing much of any interest or any excitement going on, especially again with the whole boat thing. It's just like the whole cave scene in the first half where it just took way too long, where they could have used more of that time for anything else, possibly try to bring the audience into the whole miniseries more, but it just felt like that they just couldn't think of any ideas for these two situations within this miniseries.
Well, and like I said a moment ago, I think what they thought was, okay, we need some sort of excitement, and that's better than nothing. So they put in this whole hostage drama in there. But I really thought, look, there could have been a better way you could have done this. And and again, some of this may depend on the budget, but I really think, and this I don't think would have taken that much extra money, if at all, where you spent more time having the journalists and the scientists maybe just trying to figure out the origin of Aegon, trying to learn more about him,
And
getting these main characters' backstory involved more. Yes, it's pretty late to be doing that, but it's better than bringing in two characters that are not main characters into the film just for the sake of trying to entertain them, but at the same time, it really has nothing to do with the main premise of the film.
and and it should have gone to the route of what the first Gamera movie did. All it was is with this focusing on the scientists
Focus
and
is the main word.
trying to figure out the origins of Gamera, and focusing on them, nothing else. Maybe some of the reporters that were part of it too. It's been a while since I've last watched the first
There are
Gamera
three like
movie,
versions of that film.
but yeah, and with the whole robbers in this miniseries, it just felt like there was a wrench just thrown into the whole machine just kind of sort of interfered with the whole flow or stream, and just sort of just kind of messed a lot of stuff up.
The only thing that I could think of that would be a legitimate excuse to put this subplot into the film would be if your main characters, if one of them or all of them may have had some weird scheduling conflict at the time, because maybe they were doing something else, and the studio producing this was saying, "Well, shoot, we're on a tight shooting schedule here. We need to try to get this done at such a date. We are not done yet. We need something." And then so they brought this in. That would be the only legitimate excuse I could say that would justify this. But I highly doubt that. I highly doubt that was the issue here. And like you said, like I didn't even think about it, but that's a good example.
And
The original Gamera, and like you said the key word, focus. And that's not what happened when they decided to bring in these robbers here, or these crook, whatever you want to call them, druggies, into the film. The best thing you can do in any kaiju movie, because people, let's face it, people come to these things for the monsters. They don't come for the characters. Yes, if you have
mhm,
great characterizations and stuff like the original Gojira, hey, that's great, but that's an added bonus. People come to these by and large for the giant monsters. Focus. Like, you don't necessarily have to have Agon on the screen, but if you talk about him and maybe you have some pictures drawn and stuff where the characters are going through a book trying to learn about it or whatever, that's intriguing because you're learning about it and all that. You're learning more things with the main characters as you go through the film. That's what they should have done. And again, like I said, that probably would have cost next to nothing extra.
mhm,
And in fact, it actually would have been cheaper because they did some underwater shooting a couple of times for this whole druggy deal that they did in the latter part of this film. It probably would have been cheaper,
mhm,
but that's not the route they took. And that's what's so frustrating because there's just like you said, there's just a lack of focus. It is a totally different thing for a good chunk of it, and even then, at the end, when Aegon is the main focus again, next to nothing happens, and it's frustrating and it's disappointing because, like we both said just a little bit ago, the first half of this miniseries and the build up to it is superb. It's just about as good as what you'll get throughout most kaiju films
mhm,
at the time, you know, and then they just again, the ending is supposed to be your big exciting set piece, and it goes out in a whimper.
mhm. Yeah, and probably the last thing I'm going to at least touch upon before probably move on here, since we kind of talked about this whole situation for a bit. But my final point on this is that, yeah, when it does come to the whole robber situation, as far as focusing, with the lack of focus part, and when it comes to the robber thing, they don't necessarily talk about uh, Agon being part of the film, which, yeah, it just sort of throws everything into a loop, and it's like, what? I thought I was supposed to be watching a monster movie, not this sort of cop uh, type of movie, or anything. What kind of other genre that they were trying to throw into this, and just didn't. It just threw everything into a loop at that point.
It's my main issue with the movie Dagora. To be perfectly honest, I remember when I bought that movie, I was so excited. I'm like, all right, another Ishiro Honda kaiju film, and this time it's about a space jellyfish. Like, what could go wrong? And then I watched it, I'm like, what the hell? Like, the kaiju's barely. That movie, I think, does it worse than this because at least throughout half the movie, Aegon is the central focus, whereas in Dagora, you probably get like 5 minutes of Dagora in an hour and a half film, and that to me has always been one of the more disappointing of Honda's tokusatsu films. And this film is kind of in that same line, although I would say it's not as severe as Dagora.
Hmm.
which is something. I mean, if you do something slightly better than, some of Honda's work, I mean, that's something. But still, it comes at the worst time. I think it would have been a little bit different if they did this at the beginning of the miniseries. If you had put this maybe at the beginning of the series and then you kind of switch things around a little bit and then rewrote it to accommodate what would happen next as the story progresses, it probably would have been better and ran more smoothly. But that's just not what happened. By the
Hmm.
way, anybody who needs an editor and someone who's a cleanup writer for your script, I'm your man, especially, with kaiju films, because I kind of know what I'm talking about here.
So, since we're kind of beating a dead horse at this point, let's just sort of moving on. Let's talk about the practical and visual effects for this movie. So, why don't you take it away?
They're pretty good. I would argue they're about as good as what you would get maybe with most camera films at the time. Uh, the suit is good. It's not great. I mean, it's of slightly lower quality, but it's still good. It
It
does what it's
seems
supposed to do.
it seems
Um,
to be a little bit of a thinner material just when you see it up close in some of the shots.
yeah, and it's not as mobile. It's not as well detailed and defined as what you'll see with somebody like Toho. But
But when it
um,
does come to detail, probably the most fascinating part of the suit that I've seen by far, even comparing to some of the other kaiju suits over the years, is kind of the whole breathing mechanism aspect that
yeah,
they put onto Agon.
yeah. I mean, that's good. I mean, it's a slight detail that basically most people either forgot or didn't care to
Especially
incorporate.
for a TV show that's, probably on a tight budget, too.
Well, yeah, and really the only thing that I would consider to be the most jarring is when they show stock footage of the self-defense force, because that film that they show when they cut to those brief moments, it's very obvious that stock footage. The film quality is less, and at the same time, it's very scratchy. It's got a lot of film artifact on it,
Hmm.
and that's the most jarring thing. But again, it's a mini series that whose budget is very minimal. So, again, how far are you willing to criticize it? In that aspect, I'm willing to criticize it a little bit, but not too far.
Hmm. And besides the suit being pretty good for on a tight budget mini series for what it is, I would also would have to say when it comes to the buildings, the miniatures on that front, especially for a TV show, and comparing it to like the later Ultraman TV shows, because this was made like a few years before the first Ultraman was televised, and just with the miniatures and what they had to, with all the money that they had, these practical effects, I think, and miniatures were pretty darn good.
Yeah, well, and then we're forgetting too, they made, part of a large section of the tail at one point too. I don't
Hmm.
know how much that
Yeah, I almost
cost.
forgot.
It's decent looking, but to be perfectly honest with you, I would rather wish that they hadn't done that and they had put that money towards more moments of miniature work and work to get some like small tanks and pyrotechnics in there to go and confront Agon, that sort of stuff. I would rather that they put it towards something like that than a giant tail that literally is used for maybe no more than 2 minutes. And, I just, I would rather just see more city destruction and tanks shooting at it than I would that. Because especially for a mini series, what you need to do is use your money more wisely. And I feel like here with this particular mini series, they were half and half on it. In some areas they I think spent the money well. In other areas, no, they made the wrong decisions.
Hmm. Yeah, so yeah, I can't really think of anything else on the whole practical visual effects part. Well, maybe one last thing. I think when it comes to some of the visual effects with the fire and some of the other uh, matte screens and everything, I think some of it did age pretty darn well, or sort of matched
Okay.
up well, especially when it comes to like the matte screens. They almost sort of blended in with the whole foreground.
Yeah, I mean, again, the effects work here, I think, in many ways, uh, is pretty darn good. You have to remember, though, because like you were comparing it with Ultraman, you have to remember, I think, miniseries for a one-shot story, kind of like this, is going to have a higher budget than, let's say, the equivalent of even 4 television episodes that would equal out to be the same length. Because television, typically is done on the cheap, even back then, and they have even tighter schedules then, as well. So I mean, again, yeah, on some levels it's impressive, even for its time, and even like you said, some of that stuff even holds up fairly well today. And yeah, I mean, I'm willing to give them props where I think they deserve it, and definitely there are just some shots in here that are done very well. There's some that are okay, and there's some that are meh. And I think that's kind of to be expected, more or less, out of something kind of like this.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I kind of want to move on to the music. And when it comes to the music, all in all, there really isn't much music to be heard in this movie. But I think with the sort of music choice that they did when it comes to certain areas, and it's just pretty minimal parts. But I think they did a pretty good job when it comes to the whole music, and just and I think it kind of adds the atmosphere to the kind of movie that they want to go with, and I think they put the music in the right areas, and with the majority of the film, I think even without the music, it just felt, I think, pretty good, and just sort of fits right into this kind of overall uh, kind of film that they were trying to go with.
I kind of want to stop the talk on the music for just a second. I want to go back to just sort of how we were talking about how the second half of this series was different from the first
No.
half. No, because I think I got a couple bits of important information here. This series had two different writers and two different directors. And you had one writer, Kozo Ukida, who did
Uchida.
episodes 3 and 4, and then those episodes 3 and 4 were done by a different director named Fuminori Ohashi, and then for episodes 1 and 2, Norio Mine, and it says Shinichi Sekizawa, but it doesn't have episodes 1 and 4 in parentheses by his name like
Or
it
one and
does
two.
3 and 4. Yeah, like it does by the other writer. I don't know if that means Sekizawa wrote episodes 1 and 2, or if he just is in general a consultant overall. I'm not sure, but that explains an awful lot. I think about the issues that we have with this miniseries is that you have two different writers, two different directors. Obviously, like we said, this is a miniseries. Japan was a tad different than the U.S. in that they had tended to have tighter shooting schedules and smaller budgets for a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were like, okay, we're going to make everything all at once. So I think they had two different crews out doing their own things, and then eventually came together during the post-production process and edited everything together where appropriate. But I think that is the big problem with this film, is that you just have two different groups of people with two different sets of ideas on how to approach this. So yeah, I don't like crew number two. I think they make a pretty boring film. But as far, going back to the music here, Wataru Saito, who is the composer for this, yeah, I'm not
Wataru?
familiar with his. I'm not familiar with his work. I've never heard of his name before.
I haven't either.
It's fine. I mean, I barely notice it. I obviously notice it more with the introduction of each episode. Um, it's kind of creepy and stuff like that. I kind of like that vibe. But by and large, I mean, there just isn't much to say because it's not that noticeable. I don't think it plays a whole lot over the course of of the film or the miniseries as well. It's okay. You know, it's okay. I really don't have a strong opinion about it.
So, I can't really think of anything else off the top of my head, unless if you have anything else you want to get off your chest.
Again, crew number two, you guys needed to step up and you failed. You failed. I mean, you made a crappy second half of what was actually a pretty decent kaiju type of flick. But yeah, I mean, short podcast here. Just go into final thoughts and just kind of give it a rating.
Yeah, when it comes to this miniseries, it's pretty good for what it is. First half, it was really good. It had a lot of potential in a minus sort of kind of the long cave scene, which they should have shortened that up quite a bit. Um, and then when it comes to the whole robber scenario in the second half, it just sort of went downhill and just sort of ended in a lackluster sort of fashion. And I think there could have been more with it. I would have, in my opinion, probably Kent's as well, just take out the whole robber situation from Agon and just focus on the whole scientist and just try to have them figure out the origins of Agon and trying to figure out other things besides, trying to dump a whole suitcase of cocaine into Agon. And yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, keyword of the day: focus. So, but other than that, decent story. Yeah, there should have been some major changes and some cuts within some better additions to it. I would say okay, pretty good cast, miniatures, and the monster suit. I would say out of all of the things that we talked about, this is probably one of the better, if not the best part of the movie. Probably one of the obvious better parts of the movie. Music is pretty good as well. Not really used throughout the whole mini-series, but in certain areas kind of makes things a little bit creepy. But other than that, out of our rating, if it's a pass, rent, or recommend, I would at least give this a decent rent.
Yeah, I mean, my sentiments by and large are the same as yours. In fact, the more we talked about it this time, the more I kind of got a little bit angry about the second half, about the miniseries, about ready to Hulk out, bad half. But yeah, I mean, the first half of this is about as good as what you're going to get in most kaiju films of the time. I mean, it is done fairly well. Yeah, it's not the greatest thing in the world, not the greatest acting or the greatest storytelling. Again, for the umpteenth time, there's no groundbreaking storytelling or anything of the sort to push the genre forward in any way
Mhm.
happening in this miniseries. But it was entertaining by and large. I mean, again, we come to these for the monsters and for special effects shots and that sort of thing. And by and large, the first two episodes do that. The way this thing concludes, though, it is a confusing, just pile of burning dog shit, more or less. I mean, it just like I said, the more we've talked about it, the more I realize just really kind of how bad and boring that second half is. It really is the worst part about this, and that's a damn shame because again, uh, again for the umpteenth time, your ending is supposed to be the most exciting moment in your entire film, miniseries, whatever. And that didn't happen here. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The first half of this miniseries is the most exciting. And, it's disappointing because it started off so well and it ends off with you daydreaming or wanting to go do something else. And it slows the pace so much that it feels like the whole project is a lot longer than it actually is. And again, like I said, that's the biggest sin any piece of entertainment, especially like a movie or TV show, can do, is to not be entertaining enough to engage the people watching it. And that's the biggest problem with the second half of this whole miniseries. It is not engaging. It's not exciting. This should have been rewritten. They could have done it. That actually, like we had given an example earlier, that probably would have actually been cheaper for them to write and to execute than what they ended up doing here with magical fairy dust being dumped into the ocean. I just I scratch my head and I just am kind of like, it would have been so obvious to, yeah, if you had a tight budget, you still could have written something that had more focus and still would have been engaging enough with the main premise of this story. And they decided, no, we're going to go a different route. And the end result was something that not only feels like it came out of a different film, it also still just is not entertaining enough. And I don't care. Part of me at some point when I have seen this miniseries, I'm like, just shoot the boy. At least that'll be entertaining enough. Like your mind starts to go into dark areas just because you're so friggin' bored. You're wanting something exciting. You're wanting stakes to be raised. And it just it doesn't happen in the second half of this miniseries. And if they would have kept tighter focus on the premise, I think this could have been something that could have been a slight buy in our rating system. Instead, at best, it's a rent, which is what I'm going to give it. I still think half of it, if half of it is good, but the other half isn't, in my book, that is a rent because it means there at least is enough there to engage you on some level to some extent. And yeah, I still recommend everybody watching it at least once, yes, including the second half, because maybe you might find that second half to be better than what we do. But the first half of it, if you're coming here for the monster stuff like we did, you're gonna be sorely disappointed once episode 3 of this miniseries starts up because Agon is barely there, and then when he does show up, next to nothing happens, and it's just a damn shame. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
And
yeah, I mean, 2 rents, it's not the worst thing ever that you're gonna see, but what has me worked up is the fact that, it's just a huge disappointment considering how the whole thing started and the fact that they coulda cleaned up the second half of this miniseries and fixed it very easily, and they
mhm.
decided not to do that.
Yeah, just wish it was real much more exciting, like Galgameth. At least that movie
Galgameth is
but
probably the surprise
is
hit of
by
us
is
for
by
the year.
far is by far better.
Uh, you know, I don't know.
Oh, come on.
Overall it's more consistent. I don't know. It's hard to say.
But I'm saying compared to Agon, I'd say it's
In
by
terms of
far
overall
better.
quality, yes, but at the same time, you have to remember that's a film, not a miniseries.
Yeah, I know.
And so, with that, we conclude our final episode of Daikaiju Network for the next 2 months here. Agon the Atomic Dragon, 2 rents. Again, not the worst thing you're ever going to see, but it's still, I think, worth checking out.
Definitely. So with that, before we sign off, just want to mention that just make sure to like and subscribe to our videos and as well as channels as far as video streaming platforms. You got YouTube, although we're not really streaming on there. I'm not sure if that's going to be a thing anymore. But we're still streaming on Facebook D Live, Twitch, and Twitter. And as far as our audio versions of the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and as well as TuneIn. And you can also watch us live at our own website at DaikaijuNetwork.com.
And so when we come back on December 18th, we're going to be doing a commentary on War of the Gargantuas. And then after that, we're going to be getting prepped for our end of the year spectacular. We don't know what the date of that is going to be just yet, but we will let you know at some point, either if not by the 18th, then shortly after we do the commentary to War of the Gargantuas on the 18th. So
yeah, when it comes to the whole commentary thing with my setup at my new place, I'm going to have to figure out how to watch that movie, because I'm not sure if I'm going to have a TV or some kind of external Blu-ray or DVD drive for my PC here. So going to have to figure that out. So at least I got a couple more months to figure that out.
Well, and on my end, my response to that is to quote He-Man, "Not my fucking problem."
It should be your fucking problem.
I'm not the one moving, thankfully.
For now, it all depends. You may never know.
I hope to never move, except into a grave later. And with that, we're going to end. Thank you so much for watching or listening, depending upon how you do it. And we will see you guys here in a couple of months.
All right. Catch you guys later on December.
Cleanse your palate, and you'll be ready for more shenanigans.
Yes. See you guys on December 18th. Take care.